Today, we continue the conversation with the first ever female AFL Grand Final Umpire. Chelsea Roffey recounts the goosebump-worthy moment in 2012 when thousands of fans at Melbourne Cricket Ground cheered her on for her presence on the field as the historical female first in sport. She may always have been sporty, yet she started out as an aspiring musician with a scholarship at the Queensland Conservatorium and transitioned into journalism due to her love of language and communication. As a Churchill Fellow exploring social change that enables girls to be authors of their own lives, she's gone on to be a gender and diversity facilitator, a journalist, like I said, a speaker, and an author. And it's her experience as a female in a non-traditional domain, however, that really revealed the untapped potential for driving performance through diversity. She's created an online program to help businesses climb out of COVID-19, and it's called, How to Attract and Retain Greater Diversity. She seems to constantly be creating new and different ways to contribute to society. So Chelsea, I can't wait to get inside your mind and just learn.
Sarah, you've taken me right back to the MCG. You've created these little goosebump moments again for me in that beautiful introduction. That was awesome. Thank you.
Your life, girl.
And very kind.
And look, what I love as I, learn more about you, you've done so many diverse things, and it had me wondering, what kind of kid were you?
It's sort of funny because we use the term diverse, and that's sort of, I guess, where I've concentrated my attention these days in diversity, and it's all about inclusion and creating the right environments. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in, I guess, the jargon. But when I think about how I have always been right through my childhood and into adulthood, as well as how I think about diversity, it is about having a range of experiences and exploring what you're capable of through expressing yourself in different ways. And I guess as a child, I was very much curious about wanting to try everything, wanting to do everything. And, my mum and dad were the taxi drivers for me and my brothers as we went off to swimming and basketball and athletics and, music practice and all that sort of stuff. So I guess I've just always had this curiosity about being my best, and that sounds really cheesy, but wanting to see what I'm capable of and push the boundaries a little bit, no matter what that is, if it's physical or mental or learning a bit more about my emotional reactions and things like that. I just sort of had this very deep curiosity, I suppose.
Do you know, until you just spoke, I never even realized that the word diverse, the way I was using it, is in diversity. That's why you're the journalist, because
no, it's great. There's no issue. Yeah.
What I love is because later I want to ask you to really dive into this definition of diversity. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so diverse. So it's great. You just linked that together for me. So would your parents be surprised what your future employment was? Because how, when you love so many things, how does one thing rise to the top? How do you decide to go to the Queensland Conservatorium versus, become a professional athlete, for example?
Well, I guess, look, I probably had aspirations of being a pro athlete. I don't know if I had what it took. So I think there's this element where, I was good as a kid. I was a good runner. I was a good swimmer. I'd win trophies and things like that. But ultimately, I think while it's nice to be recognised, it's also not everything. Winning's not everything. And like I say, I wasn't necessarily the national champion or at that sort of level. Whereas I think what ended up happening, although I always had this really deep desire to succeed in whatever I was doing, but you sort of get directed in different ways by the people in your life. And I think I had this music teacher, clarinet tutor, when I was in high school, who was very influential just on my life. I think she was the first person, I think, who really put it to me that I could actually make a living as a musician, and to reflect back to me that I would have what it took to do that. So probably up until that point, I was learning and practicing clarinet, and I was really committed to it, just as I was committed to sports and academics and all that sort of stuff. But she was the one who probably guided me in a way that made me really be able to see that that could be my future. And so to be honest with you though, I've started talking about this area that I didn't eventually end up in. So that's really interesting, isn't it?
Well, what was that transition? Because you went into journalism, didn't you, at uni, or you did two things at university?
So I ended up, after I did music, so I left high school. The process of getting into the conservatorium is an audition process, and you do some testing, but it's mainly the audition. And so I think it was in September. I'm trying to remember what time of year. So you actually go through that entire process before receiving your results and going through all your test exams for year 12. And so there's got to be this level of commitment, I suppose. And it was a really hard decision for me to make, to go, I'm deciding that I want to audition to go to the conservatorium, and that's what I want my life to be. Like, I really, I think I've mellowed over the years, as tends to happen. But as a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, I was, it was this incredibly important decision that I would just agonize over. So as it turned out, you can change your mind. But
we don't know that when we're teenagers. I was one of them. I was intense.
And there's this all or nothing, very clear idea that, you have to get 100%. You have to do this, you have to do that. And it can be nice if you can channel that energy, I think, but you need to sort of learn to, I think, to take a step back sometimes and not expect so much from yourself, because it can be quite exhausting. But so I don't know where I was headed with that, because I can't remember what the question was. But it was the taking the turn from music to
journalism.
And so I finished up my music degree. So I got the music degree, and honestly, I realised that music was one of those industries where it had to be all or nothing. And I thought, do I see myself, I want to be in an orchestra. I want to be in, can I get into the Chicago Symphony? Who's going to retire and open up a spot there for 2 clarinet players? I probably had a bit more realism come into, the reality of being a professional musician, and the reality that I probably would have had to teach. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted to perform in an orchestra. And I guess I just got to the point where I thought, maybe life's going in a different direction. And it wasn't potentially all or nothing as much as it needed to be. I actually did I had a year of indecision, because I thought, well, I could use my music degree to do medicine, because in Queensland at that time, it was a postgrad course. Okay. And to be fair, I think there was probably a little bit of this voice in the back of my mind that I'd gone into this area with music where you sort of didn't need the academic achievement or the results to get in. It was an audition. And I had this thing to prove where I was like, but I'm capable, I've got the grades, I can do medicine. I can do that. And it was sort of a lot of proving myself. And so I realized I sat the GAMSAT exam for medicine, just to see how I would go. So I had like a year in between music and journalism, where I did biomed, because, so I realized that, okay, I passed the exam. So I did well enough to kind of tick the box. I didn't get an offer. So I didn't do well enough to sort of be put into a med program that year. But I spent a year exploring biomed, and there were some really interesting topics that I loved. There was some other stuff like genetics that I thought was just bloody hard. And I thought, I don't know if I could see myself doing this kind of stuff. What I found was I loved the topics where you could debate. I loved the stuff around ethics of biomedicine and things like that. And so I think the way that I eventually wound around and getting into journalism was realizing that it was that people focused, the communication side of things that I really enjoyed. And I didn't really have to prove that I could do that. And that's certainly not a good enough reason to do it. Yeah, so that was that year.
Funny, the reflection, because when you share those things, you sort of get your own view of growing up. And like you said, that all or nothing feeling, why we make the decisions that we do, how we end up. Yeah. So I related to a lot of that, actually, those twists and turns. And as you look back, you think, yeah, how did I end up switching that? Or, and then all the while, okay, so you were an umpire, you're famous for being this first female umpire of the grand final. So, what was it like to be a female in that environment? And was that going on in the background at the same time, or did this come after?
So I started umpiring. I had my first taste of umpiring in high school. And funnily enough, so I was doing all this stuff, the study academics, the music, the extracurricular sports, and just committed to it all and just burning the candle at both ends. Because you got to do all this stuff. And our family had always been a footy family, even though I grew up primarily in Brisbane with my brothers. Now Brisbane's all about rugby, and I suppose they started getting into Aussie rules when the Brisbane Lions started getting some success, sort of in the early 2000s. So that was a good time to be in Brizzy, but. Generally speaking, footy was, if you were from the southern states, you were a sort of a footy family. And so we were always into Aussie rules coming up from South Australia. I realise I haven't probably said that yet. Born in South Australia. And so the boys played footy, and one year in high school, this notice came out in the morning notices. They needed a volunteer to wave the flags, which is the goal umpire's job, essentially. It's a bit more complicated than that, but and I thought, you know what, this actually sounds like fun. And it was this thing where I volunteered. I was a footy fanatic. We used to follow the Crows when I was young, and we'd go to all the Brisbane Lions games. And I thought, look, how hard could it be? It sounds like something fun to do on Wednesday afternoons, wave the flags for the boys team. And I'm sick of study. I'm sick of music. I'm sick of all this other stuff that was so serious. And that was my first taste of umpiring. Probably did a handful of games, and then it became a part-time job when I left school and started studying music. So what was involved with that was you train a couple of times a week. So it was a great way to sort of maintain your fitness. Yeah. So even though you're in the goals, you still do endurance training and stuff. I'm not sure what the link was there, but it was great to be running around. Yeah. And maintaining that connection to sport after school. It was earning a bit of pocket money. Yeah. I used to waitress as well, which I hated. I hated it. But I also then, when I started doing footy at a community level, got paid to be at the football, which was awesome. And
were there other females doing it at that time when you were doing it part-time like that?
Yes. And I think one of the benefits of starting in Queensland was when I rocked up to training that first night, there were probably 6 other women there.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And so it was kind of no big deal. It was, you sort of knew you were in the minority, but it wasn't that big a deal that you were the only girl. Mm-hmm. And I think that, compared to perhaps some of the more traditional states with very traditional views around what it means to be involved with football and be a decision maker in that area, I think there are some really interesting cultural things that happen there. And so that was sort of my foray into it. It was always this hobby and this part-time job / hobby. And then eventually, after about 5 seasons, it got to a point where someone retired off the Queensland list as an AFL contracted umpire, and then I had my opportunity to step up.
And do you put your sights on, did you have your sights on that? If that came up, you would go. And then did you also have your sights on being the first female to umpire an AFL Grand Final? Or do those things just happen?
It became a bit of a stepping stone kind of aspirational process. I think my personality type is I'm incredibly competitive. And probably was even more so. I don't know if I'm getting soft or old or mellow or what it is, but you have this kind of perspective with age, I think, that where you sort of look back and go, wow, I was really competitive then. But I think the fact that my personality was very driven and ambitious, meant that I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I always just wanted to do the best that I could. And it wasn't sort of at all costs where I was like, you know, extremely competitive against everyone I came across. It was as much about being competitive against myself and wanting to do well in games where, you know, a lot of the skills you learn in umpiring are really technical kind of skills, and you're also learning how to manage people and read the play, and every decision that you're making really is different, and it's such an energetic and adrenaline charged environment. It's a great way to learn things about yourself. And also you're getting a lot of opinions from across the fence. So you're learning how to deal with criticism all the time. And so for me, that was a really good way, I think, also to understand my own self-perception and things like self-criticism, because you've got to learn to balance that a little bit. If everyone else is criticizing and judging you, you sort of start to see with a little more clarity, you know, perhaps that relationship with yourself, which has been a really great lesson.
Yeah, that's actually quite, you know, when people talk about social media and receiving like negative feedback, you think about, oh, wow, you had screaming fans yelling what, like, that sucks. Terrible.
Yeah, or
like, I don't know, what do they say without swearing? Well, you could swear.
Well, that's all right. Yeah, no, I won't swear. But you do get, you know, there are moments where, yeah, people are just, they call you names and, like, I mean, and you think, God, heat of the moment. Yeah, but it's ordinary. It's an ordinary situation. Like if you were to take a step, as soon as you step outside of that white line.
But you know what? This podcast is actually called In the Game. And the thing that you just said, I love that comment. I'm going to tag onto it, because when you're in the game, you're actually on the field.
Yeah.
Real stuff happens and you're learning how to deal with it. From the sidelines, we have plenty of commentary, including all those people yelling at you, have plenty of opinions, but to actually be out there, like, I mean, that's what's really amazing. Like you had to figure out ways to deal with that, cope with it, drown it out, whatever you did. Do you think, I don't know why this came to me, but that moment when you ran out on the field and people cheered you on, was the realization of a dream the moment when they were cheering you on, or was the game, like umpiring the game, the dream? What part of that would you reckon was the thing?
That's a really insightful question. I think initially it was all about getting that game, because, and I guess, sorry, I know you asked before whether it had always been an aspiration, and I guess just to finish that bit off, I think like anything, you kind of start to develop these aspirations because you realize that it could happen. Whereas probably in the beginning, when I first was listed with the AFL, I thought, you know, the idea of doing a grand final seemed ludicrous. Like, I was like, I can't believe, but it was like this moment where I can't believe I'm umpiring the AFL. This is amazing. Like and so there was this real excitement and sense of honor around it. And I just wanted to get out there and this sense of, I suppose, proving myself, because there was this other element to it where it was this sort of newsworthy item of being a female. And so there's this sense of going, okay, well, I'm just going to show them that, you know, I can do it. So I guess the idea then of skipping forward to getting to a grand final, like I think for quite a few years leading up to that, it had been, you know, I suppose I'd had experiences with colleagues as well, as an example, they weren't the best of experiences. And they left me wanting to absolutely just stick it up and like just go, you know what, I can do this. And I sort of was fueled by a lot of motivation around anger. But it wasn't like my whole life was angry, but it was like when I was out on the field, like I was really bringing it. Yeah. And getting to that game was just, it was just the most amazing thing. But then to step out onto the field and realize and hear people cheer after my name was read out was like, oh my God, like it was sort of this next level. I think it was almost like accepting that while I had always acknowledged the relevance of being a woman in a man's domain, I never wanted that to be the primary focus of who I was. I wanted to be, you know, as I think most people do, judged on my merits and given an opportunity based on me as a person, not me as a flag waver for women, even though I care about that stuff. But just stepping out and hearing people get behind me like that, especially as an umpire, it just took it to another level where I think I was probably willing to accept that is actually a huge part of my story, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah,
you know,
like emotional. I get it. I totally get it, because that journey, like you said, you're actually inside of yourself, you're being your best. So it's sort of like, I'm not my best because I'm a woman, I'm just being my best. But there's like that beautiful acceptance of people recognizing what's going on. Like when Barack Obama gets elected, and he comes into office, there's you are great for the job, and then you as a Black man are demonstrating something to the population. Yeah, so there's like two things. Yeah, that's beautiful how you said it. Really
and I think also there's kind of like this, you can have this awareness of the environment or the culture, and you wanting to be your best, but also having to push up against certain attitudes or that prove it mentality. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes in being your best, not necessarily opposition, but just in that prove it mentality. And it's almost like you've got to buy into it just by doing it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's sort of like you don't really want to admit that that's a part of your motivator. But you've got to buy into this argument and this culture that says, oh, well, because you're a female, you're not going to succeed in this environment, and therefore you have to prove yourself. You've got to do all the extra training, and you've got to put all the effort in to make sure that you are competing on a stage where you're not putting your foot wrong, because people sort of jump in and criticize. And it's almost like that kind of that tension between not wanting to accept it but having to buy into it.
Yeah, it's like a bit of it's this cool conversation. It's like the calling it out, because our volleyball coach, mine and Nat, we shared a coach, and he used to say, he was a Black American guy who she had for 16 years, and he used to call it his chip on his shoulder, because he felt that he was representing all Black men.
Right.
And the weight of that, like in Australia is where he kind of released that. And he realized that he's so much more than just that title. And I'm trying to recall a little bit more of what he shared there, but that's what this reminds me of. Is I used to play baseball, be the only girl. And I remember Mom and I, like, it was like Mom was the only mom, and we were out there like proving, and that proving has a cost. I don't know if you felt that, but I remember I had a bad back injury in my volleyball career. And I remember thinking, what part of that is carrying the load of proving that I'm strong. Like if somebody said, can I carry your bag? No, I can do it. Like that's just an example of my personality. And so I think with age, like my coach, it was sort of just, does this matter as much as I think it does? Now, I want to transition this though, because what you've done with it that's so beautiful is with your Churchill Fellowship, you then go, okay, I want to explore this a little bit deeper, girls being the author of their own lives. So in your travels, what did you discover about social change for girls? And what did you discover out there beyond Australia? And then kind of reflect back about Australia.
I think that, so probably the crux of what I really wanted to explore came a lot down to narrative and storytelling. And I'm going to try not to be too cliched in the phrases that I'm using, because I know some of these words are just, it's sort of hard to be not cliched in how you say it, but
just say it.
I think, and I think like storytelling at the time was like, everything's about storytelling. But for me, what I really wanted to understand, I think firstly was my own narrative. So I'd always been really curious about the fact that it's sort of like I'd had this whole narrative and story around being, this female, breaking down the barriers, and it's always about barriers for a start. So that's my first issue. All of this stuff around being more diverse and inclusive tends to have a narrative that is built around why it's difficult. And it's built around the resistance. And so I wanted to understand a bit more about what's going on there. And I knew that I could do that through examining my own story. And so it was really fantastic to, I guess, as a journalist as well, it was sort of, how can I bring the story to it so that people are engaging in a way that gets them feeling passionate and feeling a personal imperative to actually make some change. So spent some time at Stanford University because they study storytelling, which is like the most amazing thing. It's a storytelling project, it's called, but I just wanted to spend some time just examining like what is storytelling and how can you utilize, narrative for social change. So that sort of formed the crux, and probably to get to your point around, what did I discover? Coming back to my, I guess, that founding belief of diversity, I really, the conversations that I had really looked at diversity from the concept of worldview. So I sort of, when I think of diversity, I'm like, okay, of course it's going to be age, gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity. There are all these things that make people diverse, and they're all like the easy labels that we apply. But ultimately, why does that diversity matter? Well, it matters because the person at the center of that label is actually presenting an alternative worldview. So they're presenting a different way of seeing the world, a different way of interacting with the world, the relationships they have. And so it can sort of be a really, sometimes I think it seems like a really fluffy way to approach it. But at the end of the day, I think if I'm having a conversation with a man who might quite derogatorily refer to himself at the moment as like a middle-aged white guy, like the number of men who I meet who go, oh, well, I'm just a middle-aged white guy, as though it's the worst thing you could possibly be in the diversity space. But I know that if I can have that conversation with him around what it means to bring yourself to work, or to be treated as having value because of the range of diverse ideas that he might be able to bring to the table. And I'm not saying that, it's about sort of putting middle-aged white guys on pedestals or anything like that. But I think it's having that personal connection with someone on a level where they can see that diversity worldview goes far deeper than what's on the outside. And so that was a real tangent there. but in this whole Churchill process, I think for me, that was the kind of the founding principle that emerged over my discussions. And I had discussions with a lot of people. Like I spent time at the Canadian Women's Foundation, and they do a lot of really brilliant programs working with girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, working with schoolgirls around programs such as Media Smarts, where it's learning to cut through some of the media messaging that we get. And as we know, girls, particularly around that sort of teenage, are faced with, issues around body image. And these are sort of real issues that can then affect involvement in sports and self-confidence and empowerment and all this other stuff. So through these kind of conversations, I was sort of able to consolidate, I suppose, what I see as being the founding principle to how I want to create diverse perspectives and use, I suppose, my story to leverage diversity and inclusion.
Are people open to this in Australia?
Look, I think probably yes. I'm discovering, I think the power of a story can't be underestimated, because I should be overestimated. I always get those two mixed up.
Under or over?
Yeah, you can't overestimate the power of a story. I think being able to create an experience that helps people to empathize, or to feel what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. The more that you can create that experience, I think the more you can open people's minds to the fact that they have bias, as we all do. Or, look, these are some of the barriers that are operating statistically. Let's look at some of the data. But I think you've got to find a way in, and stories are a fantastic way to do that. And I suppose the way I've been able to leverage my story is because, there might be someone out there who's like, oh man, yeah, we'll get her in. She's umpires in the AFL, and they're mad for Collingwood or something. But there's a corporate tie-in, or there's some opportunity, and I think you can often create an experience where people are surprised by what you have to say. So they think they're getting someone who can talk about, what it was like to, umpire on Anzac Day, and you can use that. But then you end up talking about something completely different, which is, what it's like for a woman in a male domain, and the psychological motivations of what can encourage or discourage women.
Absolutely. And I think this topic is really interesting because we all, when you said bias, I always think about someone who said we're like fish in water. Fish don't know they're in water. It's only when you get that experience of, oh, wow, maybe I am in water. Like, to me, that's what bias is. It's very hard to see outside of it because you're in it, like you're swimming in it. And so what you're doing with your story and opening people up to different perspectives is one thing. And I just wanted to quickly share that at university, I did Women in the Americas. Is that what it was? Yeah. Or something political and women. And our teacher, she was so amazing. She had us grab out of a hat these scenarios. So she had, sorry, let me set that up better. So 4 corners of the room, she had something like gay, lesbian, bisexual, and maybe transgender, let's say. So we didn't have as many letters at the end of LGBT, So, so I've been with a female partner for 20 years, but at this time, no, not even on the radar. So it wasn't like thinking that I was gay, like there was nothing there.
Yep.
Okay, so that's interesting part of that. So anyway, then we pick out these scenarios out of this hat, and let's say 20 students, we all have a scenario, and it says things like, I'm a female, I've never kissed a girl, but I've been dreaming about my best friend who's a female. I like to go, I'm a male, and I like to go into the women's bathroom. And so all these little scenarios. And so each one of us had one. And then she said, okay, timer start, go to which area belongs to your scenario. And everyone was like, oh.
So did you have to select the scenario, or you just had to pick up and read a scenario?
That's right.
Okay, cool.
So it's like you become the scenario, let's say.
Okay, yep.
So you go, oh, okay, where do I belong? What's my name? What's my tag? And what we all got was like, firstly, the labels don't even make sense because nobody actually knows what they mean.
Yeah.
And so I really got like this idea that, what are the labels? Why do we say them? What do they even mean? I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this, because then when I met Nat, who when I met Nat, I was just so hell-bent, and I think I still am a little 20 years later, but that I'm not a lesbian. And then I'm afraid to say that because I don't want to offend lesbians, but I think it was more about, well, what does lesbian even mean? And why am I in that category? And I think you were talking a little bit about female, and well, what does that mean? Because we're all so different. And so I bring all that up because what's the real definition of diversity, actually? What are we really talking about when we want to boost diversity in like the business space and things? What are we actually talking about with diversity?
Well, for me, simply, it's the value of an alternative worldview. Now that's how I see diversity.
Say it again.
It's the value of an alternative worldview.
Okay.
Now, again, I know that's pretty like, oh yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, think about that for a sec.
Yeah. But what does it mean in terms of, there's so much research out there saying, okay, if you have gender balance in teams, for example, if you've got gender balanced executive teams between 40 and 60% male to female ratio, those teams are more likely to outperform the industry average of non-balanced teams.
Okay.
Does that make sense how I actually referred to there? Yeah. So if you can have gender balance on your exec teams, so that's one way. If you look at that statistic, for example, but when I look at that statistic, I go, okay, but yes, that data is true to say that a female perspective matters. And we know it matters because, you can, if you're running a business, you want to be able to appeal to female clients and customers. You want to be able to be innovative in the way that you are having discussions. And that's because, going through the world as a female is going to be different to going through the world as a male. It's just simple. It's environment, social conditioning, all this stuff, I think, adds up to that, what I call worldview or perspective. So, of course, gender matters, for example, or, you could say that for sexuality. You could say, okay, if you are of a particular sexuality, you are, experiencing the world perhaps in a different way because of that. But that's never going to make the whole person or the entire person. Like, it's a ridiculous thing to say, that someone would be defined by that.
But the worldview thing is good. I think there's like a, when you live on a different line, like there's a different perspective about the world. And what you just said, I mean, clearly we don't plan these conversations, right, guys?
No, that's right. Yeah, everyone
we're both having realizations as we're talking. But I was thinking about the Olympics with the Paralympians combined into it was the Commonwealth Games, actually, where they did that really fluidly. Like it was the first time the Paralympians were competing at the same time as the able body. And I remember it just felt like there was, the two together made both better, if I can say that, because I had been to a Commonwealth Games for a friend who's Paralympian, and it was just those events. And I remember being a bit confused, like, I don't understand what's going on, the gradient. There was a lot of things that I wanted to understand. And then integrating, having them all together was so interesting, because I feel like it gave this added understanding about I don't even know if these are the right terminologies, but able body. We were able to see, like, whoa, the nuances. And then, oh, wow, you did that with one freaking arm. Or, like, I don't know. It just feels like those are worldviews or ways of looking at the world or feeling the world that are different. And it accentuated. It was better, like your stat just said.
Yeah. And I think it just reframes the focus and the discussion. Like, there could be someone out there who loves the Olympics and loves watching sport, but has never sort of bothered to look at Paralympics, or for whatever reason has not been open to that world. And they might have a view of, the Olympics obviously is for real athletes, and, this is the benchmark, this is the standard, and here's an event. It's a 100-meter sprint, whatever it is. And then potentially have a view around the Paralympic version and going, well, clearly it's not as good, or it's not as, it's not real, or it's, because that's my benchmark. But then, as you say, you go and, you're getting this whole insight into what it actually means to sprint 100 meters in a wheelchair, or whatever the case may be. Or I actually went to school with a girl who was incredible. She was a swimmer and had no arms. And I'm like, you don't compare apples and oranges, right? And so it's actually, diversity is about celebrating difference. Diversity is not going, well, this is the benchmark, and therefore this is, this is the standard upon which we compare everything else. I think it's having that ability to open your mind and go, well, this is the scenario. This is the reality for this person, and it's not better or worse. It's just a different set of benchmarks and circumstances and measurables. And I think the more that we're able to kind of challenge the dialogue to reframe it a little bit, we can be far more inclusive, and we can go like, well, how do we want to get more girls involved in sport? Well, maybe it's not all about being competitive, or maybe it's coming at it from a different perspective, where, we see some great campaigns around, they focus more on, what it feels like to exercise, and, the mental and emotional benefits that can come from that. And again, I'm not saying that, women aren't competitive, because I know women can be competitive, but there are lots of women out there who don't exercise because they're afraid of being judged. They're not interested in competition. And they just miss out on this whole world of, physical movement and camaraderie and all the wonderful benefits of sport, because they frame it in a certain way, or it is framed in a certain way. And that was another tangent.
But you know what I just remembered? There's this really great book called Born to Run. And you know how you're talking about the benchmark? Well, there's a tribe, like this Mexican tribe, that run these ultra marathons, and ultra running is really popular these days. That group actually moves the entire benchmark, but their method, like when you were describing some traits or qualities of their training, they are doing it in a completely different way, meaning the whole book is about the joy of running. And the benchmark, if you're talking about time, they actually do it faster by training that way. So what I'm just thinking is we might try to say that we're comparing apples with apples, but I think that adding difference is actually going to move the whole needle up, you know, and the benchmark will elevate actually overall. And I think even in sport where you're thinking it's a time thing and it's this, and I'm like, you know what? I've done enough Eastern philosophy to see that you can move the needle and go faster by trying less hard. You know, like that, those kind of philosophies where you go, oh my gosh, you know, our coach was very Zen, and he used to talk about, if you've done something once, you can do it again. And, you know, the more we would try to recapture it, he would say, okay, well, your muscles are tightening, your bodies are doing a different shape now. That's why you can't find it. It's there, but he's like, you're so busy looking for it. And these are like very kind of interesting philosophies, but ultimately the needle shifts with different worldviews like that.
And it's beautiful. Like that's a brilliant reference to the importance of fun or feeling free, or you're perhaps not focusing on the time. You know, I know we've seen it in, in Aussie rules. So Richmond Footy Club, which has had great success over the past few years, it's sort of become well known now that the entire focus from their coach, Damien Hardwick, started to shift towards enjoyment and having fun, and the relaxation that came from that, and the sense of trust and camaraderie, and I guess all this stuff that happens behind the scenes with training that isn't just, you know, slotting goals and getting your fitness up and all of this. It was like the missing piece to the puzzle, where as soon as there was this enjoyment element brought in, the success started to come. And I know, fun is actually it's a cornerstone of our AFL values for umpiring. We come up with values every couple of years that we're adhering to through the year. And when you don't have that sense of enjoyment, it's almost like, what's the point? But I suppose to get to the reason you brought that up to begin with is if everyone has got their caps on as to, well, this is what success looks like. And, you know, success is, you know, serious training, and it's this and it's that. And there's a very clear, structured approach to it. What happens to the person who's going, you know, hey guys, have you thought about having some more fun? Or have you, as you say, bring in that difference? It's just, it will shake it up a bit in order to raise the needle. And as you say, I completely agree with the point you've just made.
Like, this is like hilarious. This is a theme now. I'm bringing up Michael Jordan's The Last Dance.
Oh, how good. How good is it?
How good is it? Every interview I'm doing. But Phil Jackson brought in Native Indian, like First Nations philosophies. And you see the players, like they're doing like burning, like they're smudging, and they're doing these like tribal things. And yet people go, oh, wow, the winningest team of all time. And you think to yourself, yeah, well, that's someone that's bringing in difference. Like his acceptance of Dennis Rodman was like just epic, and nobody after could handle Dennis. Like when you read about what happened after 98, and I thought that was one of the most amazing parts of that series, wasn't it? How he actually gave Dennis Rodman, like, I see you, brother. Like, I see who you are in this tribe. I'm like, that's amazing.
And especially when I was really like, okay, I'm loving Dennis Rodman. I'm loving Dennis Rodman because, you know, just, you know, be yourself. But then sort of to see the coach's response to that, you think, wow, that's incredible. And imagine what that's saying. But then even towards the end of the series, sorry for the spoiler if anyone hasn't seen it, you know, Dennis is really pushing that barrow. Dennis is going for it.
The final episode, he pushes it. Let's put it that way.
And I'm like, oh my God, like, how is the team going to respond to this? Like, what is this going to mean? And still, Phil Jackson, it was just basically saying to the media, well, you guys are, you know, making a big deal out of this. This is not affecting our team. He was just so strong in that commitment to accepting difference and knowing, he must have known that, you know, obviously Dennis he's delivering on field. The team is doing fine. But to be able to commit to doing something that seems to everyone else to be crazy / risky, I think that encompasses diversity, because people see you doing the diverse thing or doing the different thing as being the risk, but it's the opposite. There's a cost to not doing it, and you see it in business, you see it in sport. You know, you've got to have the boldness to do something that is different, particularly if things aren't working the way they are.
Girl, we're ending it on that was like boom.
Good.
What you said was so amazing. That is not the risk. The risk is not doing it. I've loved this conversation. I feel like we've just like opened up a can of worms, so we need to come back and talk more about it. But that was just a boom moment. Thank you.
I know, thank you. And I really hope that wasn't like a huge mess, because like I felt like sometimes I was just I was rambling, and I thought, oh look, I hope this is making sense. So I'm hope that you're happy.
Very happy. Mwah.
Cheers.